Hey guys, how's it going? Preparing here. So yesterday I made a video about Cyclone, and there were a few comments that were pretty interesting. Some of them related to the effectiveness of Cyclone not being quite what it was because of the fact that you're hitting so quickly. Because I mentioned that the Cyclone, while it is a 35% damage effectiveness, it hits twice. So it was kind of like a 70% damage effectiveness. And some people brought up the correct point that if you are a physical character, this is not actually 70%, because if you hit for double your damage in one hit, you would do more damage than if you would hit for half the damage in two hits. Because in Path of Exile, the damage is reduced from armor by a greater margin if the hit is smaller. So, the same amount of armor will reduce a smaller hit by a larger percentage than a bigger hit. And, you may want to rewatch that if you don't know what I'm talking about, but I've brought up this point a few times. But this kind of, comes back to how to understand the new abilities. This is fairly important because, the last 2 weeks we've seen 2 new skills come in Path of Exile. I don't know if this is the beginning of what the developers have called, the 1 skill a week thing, but maybe it's just a teaser a little bit. But eventually, they have said that they want to introduce 1 new skill a week for quite some time, and see what the response is. So it's a very important thing to understand how to scale an ability and how to figure out how you would end up doing the most damage. Now, when it comes to spells, it's usually fairly simple because spells don't have things like chance to hit, and there's really not too much to it. When it comes to an ability like Incinerate, which was one of the newer abilities, Incinerate's special feature was that it could not crit. So if a spell can't crit, you can only really scale it through spell damage and cast speed. And in the case of Incinerate, because it does more damage, the longer you channel it, and that length that you channel it is affected by cast speed becomes the dominant stat in that, damage equation. You want lots of cast speed. So it's a little bit different, but there are some things that you can keep in mind that, can kind of show you how these things tend to work. So if you have a spell, you have the 3 factors. You have spell damage, cast speed, and the combination of crit and crit damage. The problem with crit damage is that in hardcore you'll probably die if you have too much of it to reflect, unless you compensate for that through other means. So that's not always the best option, but you always have the cast speed and you always have the spell damage, at least to a reasonable level. So for spells, it's very simplistic. When it comes to melee attacks, or like range attacks, or just attacks in general, there are a few things to consider. So you can go the physical route if you choose to go a physical based character. You can go pure physical, but if you do pure physical, you usually crush your own armor when it comes to reflect mobs. So that's why you kind of want to mix it up a little bit. What you want to do as a melee, even if you are pure physical, is use pure physical scaling. So you'd use, let's say you use heavy strike, you'd want to use it with melee physical damage to multiply it again. And if you had the opportunity to be on full life, you can use melee on full life to multiply it again. But in general, what you do to increase the elemental side of things is use things like Hatred, which converts your physical to cold, and then use Added Fire, which converts your physical to fire, and then use something like Weapon Elemental Damage, which multiplies your existing elemental damage. So that's kind of the stuff that you'd want to be using in that case. So that's like a physical base, but it's still part elemental. It's kind of important. Your hit won't be as big as if you were full physical. So if you had like a crap load of physical damage percent and you use the melee damage and the melee damage on full life, it won't be quite as high physical, but although you'll take a little bit of an armor hit, it'll still be better. It'll still be better in terms of survivability, and that's really kind of the balance that you'd want. But the other side is the elemental. So if you go pure elemental, you can just stack the shit through gear. So you can just get all the lightning plus lightning stuff on your rings, plus cold, whatever, amulet on your weapons. You can even get on your boots. You got to make sure you run the auras, anger, wrath. So that's kind of stuff that you're looking for. But when you use that stuff, because it's all additive instead of percentage based, you want to scale it with attack speed, because attack speed will scale it more than the other side of things. So when it comes to a skill like Cyclone, this is the part that really comes into play. Cyclone gains attack speed from just the ability leveling. I believe at level 20 it has 38% bonus to attack speed just from the gem itself without any kind of quality bonuses. So when you see a gem like this, coupled with the fact that it hits twice per attack, So it's kind of like 70% damage effectiveness, but it's only 70% if you do elemental, because if you do physical, that 70% is further reduced by the smaller hit resulting from the armor of the monsters. So those two things coupled together pretty much gives a clear understanding that the ability will do more from scaling it with elemental sources. So when Cyclone came out, I took a look at the factors that were involved, and I immediately knew that elemental was better. It may not do the most damage if you have like the craziest weapons or gear in the world. I'm not too sure, I haven't ran the numbers, but as far as you can tell, with an ability like this, it should be a clear winner. While even if your damage is not really the highest using elemental, you have to keep in mind that the other side is the curses. So when you want to use curses for elemental bases, you have much stronger ones than if you were physical. If you have physical, you have like vulnerability or something. That's really about it. When you're elemental, you have elemental weakness. You can stack that with like conductivity or something like that to further increase your damage. And that's the other side to consider. If you are an elemental-based, attack-based character, you can get stuff like static blows, and you can further increase your damage by shock stacking. And shock stacking is also amplified by the attack speed, which you get for free in this skill for Cyclone. So when I made my build with Cyclone, I made it, I want as much plus elemental damage as possible on my gear, and I'll scale Cyclone with the attack speed on the gem, and the attack speed from faster attacks linked with the gem, as well as linked with weapon elemental damage to multiply all the existing elemental damage. Coupled with the fact that if I use static blows, which I do, and conductivity, which is the curse that also adds chance to shock on hit, I can shock while I'm running through the targets, and the amplification of the shock, as well as the small penalty, or no penalty in my case, from using smaller hits, makes it the right way to go in this case. So just some examples, just some helpful tips. Maybe you guys can understand how this stuff will work a little bit better, because it's a really good thing in Path of Exile to try to come up with your own ideas. Even if they may not be the best ones, you'll at least develop some kind of perspective. So I hope you guys take this information and really try to understand the game a little bit better, and get as much enjoyment out of that as I do. So until tomorrow, guys, I'll see you then.